Welcome everybody, I am Tock Custom, and on this video we're going to show you how to tailor a button-down shirt just like we made in our last video. If you missed that, feel free to go back and watch that. Otherwise, if you have some shirts that you want to be a little bit more fitted, we're going to show you how to do that right now. And also at the end of the video, I'll show you how to do a long sleeve dress shirt that has cuffs. The steps are pretty much the same, but I will show you what is different with that. Now, all you're going to need to get started is whatever button-down shirt or dress shirt that you want to tailor to yourself. You'll need a sewing machine, some scissors, and some thread. Alright, so our first step to tailoring a shirt is we have to put it on and button it up. Now in this shirt, I want to bring it in about 1.5 inches on either side so that I've got a much more narrow fit. So we're going to start at the sleeve, through the armpit, and all the way down to the bottom. But before we do that, we have to open our rolled hem at the end of the sleeve and at the bottom of our side seam. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Now we're going to take about 1 inch of fabric out of this shirt on either side. So I want to take out about 2 inches of my rolled hem. So I'm just going to pop these stitches and then lay this out flat. So I've taken about 1 inch off either side of this center seam of our rolled hem, and that should open this up so that we can lay this flat. I'm going to end up ironing this, and then we should be able to see our nice raw edge. And this is exactly what we need to do on either sleeve and the bottoms of our shirt. So I'm going to do all 4 of those parts right now. Alright, so I've got all of my rolled hems open about 2 inches on either sleeve and 2 inches at the bottom of each of my side seams here. So now I'm going to press these that they're open so that they're easier to work with. Now, just so you can see how this is going to work, I'm just going to press this open and then use my iron to make sure this all lays nice and flat. And this is really going to help us when we end up tailoring these seams of our shirt. Alright, so now you should have something that looks like that. And I'm going to do this with the other 3 seams so that these are all nice and open and flat like that. Alright, so my hems on my sleeves and the bottoms are all open and pressed, so that lays flat. So at this point, we're going to want to turn our shirt inside out and lay it flat on our table. Alright, so now I've got my shirt inside out, and this is the end of my left sleeve through the armpit and all the way down to the bottom. And you should be able to see the raw edges since we opened up that hem. Now I want to take this in about 1 inch on either side, so I'm just going to kind of eyeball and mark this with white chalk. I don't know if you can see this, but this is just kind of a reference for me so that I know roughly where my stitches are going to go, and try to keep your fabric nice and flat. So it should look like that. I don't need to pin this at all. I'm just going to take this right over to my sewing machine and sew from the bottom all the way up to the end of the sleeve there. Alright, so we're at our sewing machine, and because this is a woven fabric, we can just do a regular straight stitch, which is a lot easier. Now, before we start, it's really important that you line up the 2 raw edges. If these are uneven, like that, it's not going to come together well. So you want to make sure that the raw edges of your fabric are perfectly flush with each other like this. Now, as I feed this into my machine, I want it to take out 1 inch of fabric from where we did our original seam here. So I'm going to line up this stitch with the 1 inch mark on our plate right here. So that's what we're looking to do. Now I've got this all nice and flush, everything looks good, so I'm going to do a front and back stitch. And now, all I have to do is just follow this entire stitch all the way down to the bottom of the shirt, following this 1 inch seam allowance from this black stitch right here. Alright, now as I get close to the bottom, I also want to make sure that the 2 raw edges of fabric at the very bottom are also perfectly flush so that we've got a nice even seam. Finish with a back stitch and cut my thread, and we are done with one side. So now I'm going to do the other side real quick and show you what happens next. Alright, so now you should have something that looks like this here. So here was our original seam, and here is our new seam. So normally I would just take this over to my serger like we did on the original end and just serge the whole thing, and it would trim it and clean it up. But I'm going to show you how to cut it and do a zigzag stitch for those of you who don't have a serger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim this so that the raw seam is about maybe 1/2 inch or so from our new seam that we just sewed. All right, so we've got our seams trimmed, and this is a good length for us to work with for a zigzag stitch. And again, when you use a serger or an overlock machine, it's going to lock all these up because with any woven fabric, you're going to get loose threads like this if you just lightly tug on it. We don't want that, so I'm going to show you how to clean this up without a serger so that you've got nice clean seams on the inside. Now the first part of overlocking with a zigzag stitch is you have to figure out where your zigzag stitch is on your machine. This has a digital touchscreen, so I know this is my zigzag stitch here. And what I want to do is I'm going to modify the zigzag stitch. So this tells me how wide the stitch is going to be, and this tells me how long the stitch is going to be. So I want this to be as wide as possible, which I think is 7 millimeters wide, and I'm going to keep this at about 1.6 millimeters in length, and you'll kind of see how that looks as we do this. Now that we have our zigzag set the way that we want it to, the way this is going to work is we're going to do one stitch off the fabric and then one stitch on the fabric, but I want to start on. Currently my needle is on the right side of my machine, so I'm going to use my hand wheel to go all the way down, and when this comes up it's going to snap to the left, like that. So now what I want to do is our first stitch is going to start on the fabric, and I'm going to use my hand wheel to make sure that the second stitch is going off the edge of that fabric. When I go all the way down, it should just barely be off like that. So as I do a front stitch and a back stitch, I'm going to go all the way off the edge, almost off the edge. Alright, so as I follow the seam, what's going to happen is every other stitch is going to go off the edge of the fabric, and it's going to lock any frayed or loose threads to the inside of that seam so that it stays nice and clean. Kind of like an overlock machine, but much more simplified. And I'm going to just go all the way down from the edge of the sleeve all the way down to the bottom of the shirt. Alright, so as I get to the bottom, I'm going to cut my thread, and you should have something that looks like this. And this zigzag is going to keep all of this raw fabric from fraying, and it doesn't look quite as pretty as a serge seam, but it will keep your fabric from fraying, and you're not going to get loose threads, or not nearly as many if you didn't do this at all. So I'm going to clean this up a little bit, and then I'll show you what's next. Alright, so when you're done, you should have something that looks like this, and I know it looks kind of messy, but all I need to do is just trim off any bulk right there and any loose threads. And if I pull this real tight, the hem should actually kind of start to reform by itself. And I'm just going to kind of tuck that in, and then I'm going to press this with my iron, and it should just kind of line up with the previous hem that was in there before we took it apart, like that. Okay, so I'm just pressing our rolled hem back into shape just like it was before we opened this up and tailored it, and I'm just going to do a start and back stitch here, stitch across the rolled hem, and end here by doing another back stitch, and that's going to close that up. We're going to do this on both the side seams and both the sleeves, and then we are actually done with tailoring our shirt. Okay, so here is how our new hem looks as we just kind of restitch that together. And I'm just going to trim any loose threads that we have from the outside first, and then I'm going to flip this and look at the inside, and I'm going to trim any loose threads from the inside. And when you're kind of recovering or repairing stitches, it's usually a good idea to use some kind of a fabric glue, so I'm going to use some fray check here, and I'm going to put a couple of drops there where we started and ended those stitches. Alright, so now that we got some fray check on there, that's going to look nice and clean on the inside and the outside just like that, and it's not going to fall apart in the wash or anything like that. Alright, now before we try on our new tailored shirt, I did mention that I was going to just quickly go over how you would do this with a long sleeve dress shirt. And I'm not even going to do a full demo because I don't need to. But if you were tailoring a long sleeve dress shirt like this with a cuff, you would do everything exactly the same, where you unhem the bottom and then you're going to stitch up through the armpit here. And then when you got close to your cuff, what you would do is you would follow this 1 inch or so or whatever you end up tailoring. And then as you get close to the cuff, you get closer and closer to your original seam, and you're just going to blend in with the original seam about right here so that it's completely seamless. You'd end up trimming out any extra fabric and then serging or zigzagging over that raw edge like that. Now, after you've tailored your dress shirt, if you find that the cuff is still too big around your wrist, all you'd have to do is take your button, Pop out the stitches, move it in about half an inch or an inch or however much you need to, re-sew your button a little bit into the cuff right there, and everything is going to work out perfectly just like it did with the other shirt that we just finished. Okay, so as I try this on, I can tell that this is fitting a lot better. It's not quite as dramatic as the t-shirt that we did, but as I look at my sleeve, my armpit, down the flank, and around the hips, it feels a little bit tighter and more narrow. So if it looks like I'm wearing a custom, handmade, tailored shirt, that's exactly what I'm wearing. Hopefully this helped you guys tailor your own shirts or dress shirts. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Thank all of you for your support, and I will see you in the next video.